Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, good evening to all the members of the panel. This is the overview and scrutiny meeting, the 16th of February 2023. Thank you, panel members, all for coming up. Also, thank you to our officers who are in attendance, those who've come to provide us with reports during the course of the evening, additional councillors who are coming to speak under Rule 20.1, and members of the public who are also joining us. Thank you everyone for coming and joining us. We hope you find, and also those members of the public who may be tuning in this evening or watching a little bit later, you're very welcome. We hope you find that the meeting is a worthwhile and informative one, particularly given some of the items that are on the agenda for us to be looking at this evening. But first of all, the fire alarm procedures. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase, opposite the lifts in the foyer, assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist and advise us when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent. They're not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please note the meeting is, as I mentioned, being live streamed for members of the public. It will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. But for anyone else here, does anyone intend to film the meeting? Okay, I think we can jump over the warnings and the about filming then. Speaking under Rule 20.1, I have initially a request from Councillor Garner to speak under Rule 20.1 for agenda item number 5 and agenda items number 6, 7 and 8. Councillor Whitehead, thank you for joining us for those. Are there any more members here? Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, I mean, possibly under the climate change one.
Thank you very much.
Probably not, but possibly.
And this would be before the presentation?
No.
After?
Here to potentially answer questions that may be
Thank you.
more political than technical.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other members of the public? No. I have received a request for public speaking from Ms. Elizabeth Wickenden. She will also be speaking on agenda item number 5, and in fact I will call Ms. Wickenden before Councillor Garner. And I think it's been explained to you, we'd like you to come forward to one of the microphones, and obviously you can remain there until that agenda item has been completed. Thank you very much. I have apologies from Councillor Keane. Are there any other apologies, members? I think. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, agenda item number... Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say Councillor Yates is substituting for Councillor Keane.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Councillor Yates. Declarations of interest. Any members got declarations of interest to make on the agenda this evening? Okay, then we move to approve the minutes of the overview and scrutiny panel meeting held on the 17th of January. There is a copy attached to the agenda pack, and most of you, I'm sure, will have seen it. I wasn't here for that meeting, so I'm going to ask the Vice Chairman who chaired that meeting if he would mind making the proposal and calling for a seconder for those minutes to be approved.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I propose those minutes.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you very much.
I've just checked the minutes. I assumed I was there, but I'm not. I was at the meeting. I'm not very good at signing that book, I'm afraid. So I'm in attendance. I was in attendance. I was present, and I'm not.
You were, because you made a declaration of interest later on in the meeting.
It's my fault because I'm really bad at signing that book.
So we have a proposal and a seconder. Our members, are you happy that the minutes are an accurate reflection of what went on? Thank you very much. When the signing comes, can you get... When the signing of the minutes comes later, can you get... Can I share the signing? 'Cause I wasn't here. Okay, then we're moving on to agenda item number 4. TDC's net zero strategy presentation. We have Dr. Hannah Scott with us, and as you saw, Councillor Bayford is also here should there be any questions or queries you want to bring. So I'd now like to invite Dr. Scott to make her presentation. Dr. Scott, thank you.
Thank you. So this presentation was created following a question by the chair around TDC, around how TDC can progress with the strategy when the High Court declared the national strategy is not fulfilling all legal requirements. So in July 2022, so July last year, a landmark court judgment ruled that the UK's government net zero strategy was in breach of the law. The High Court judgment said that the strategy, which sets out plans to decarbonise the economy, does not meet the government's full obligation under the Climate Change Act. In court, it emerged that the calculations by the civil servants to quantify the impact of emissions cuts from policies in the net zero strategy did not add up to the reductions necessary to meet the 6th carbon budget. So the 6th carbon budget is the volume of greenhouse gases that UK is allowed to emit between 2033 and 37. The challengers had noted that only 95% of the emissions were accounted for, and therefore there was a 5% shortfall. According to the Friends of the Earth, the government will now have to update its climate strategy and then quantify how its policies will make sure that the targets are achieved, how the climate change targets are achieved. That updated strategy will have to be presented to Parliament for scrutiny by MPs. So a Friends of the Earth lawyer said that it shows that Climate Change Act is a piece of legislation which has teeth and can, if necessary, be enforced through our court system if the government does not comply with its legal duties. And a BEIS spokesperson explained that the net zero strategy, put my teeth back in, remains a government policy and has not been quashed. In fact, the judge made no criticism about the substance of their plans, which were well on track, and in fact, the claimants themselves described them as laudable during the proceedings. So what does this mean for us? So the government strategy has not been scrapped and is progressing well, but it will be improved for the years 2033 to 37. The ruling does not undermine the government strategy, but instead asks that it's improved to meet the standards of the Climate Change Act. And this ruling shows that the Climate Change Act is enforceable and that our council should be taking it seriously. Climate change is a threat to our health and economy, and we have pledged to address this threat and avoid the extreme risks. So this is the rationale behind us writing the first TDC net zero strategy and the TDC carbon reduction plan. These documents lay out how we will reach net zero by 2030, specifically in our estates and core activities, which is in line with the Climate Change Act, as well as working with others on the Thanet-wide emissions. We have not used the government strategy to create the TDC strategy, and therefore the 5% inaccuracy in the government's documents does not impact on us. Instead, the consultants Laser Energy and I created our own carbon reduction plan specific to TDC. So that's the end of this presentation.
So my main reason for asking the question was knowing that the meeting is recorded. It's an opportunity to give a wider answer to members of the public who perhaps don't fully understand what net zero is or what the targets and aims and achievements and that are. So thank you for being prepared to come and give this update on what has happened. Do any members of the committee have any questions you wish to raise? Any concerns you may have? Okay, thank you very much. Could I just ask for confirmation? This is another thing that I've been asked questions about by members of the public, that TDC's carbon or net zero strategy is designed principally to affect buildings that TDC owns and businesses it may own the buildings that businesses operate from. In other words, directly TDC's own sphere of influence, or is it still to try and persuade everybody to get on board with TDC's net zero strategy? Could I ask you that, please?
Yeah, that's fine. So the net zero strategy actually came to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee last year on the 30th of August. So it was the draft strategy back then, and then has gone to Cabinet and has now gone out to public consultation. So the document's been out since last year, and it lays out three aspects. Firstly, our net zero pledge. So that is reaching net zero within our core estates and activities by 2030. Then by making sure that we reach net zero by 2050 within our emissions that we have partial control over, and then making sure that we also work with others in order to ensure that we're meeting the net zero target to 2050 for the whole of Thanet. So that's working with the government, working with businesses and working with the community. So that is our TDC pledge that was agreed by Cabinet last year.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Perhaps it's just worth saying that the government does have to represent, and that's going to happen, I believe, very late March or April, and then the court will have a look at it again, I suspect, to ensure that they are taking all the necessary steps. Thank you. Councillor Austin.
Can I just ask about the consultation, when it ends, and are we getting good responses from people? Are there things that we as members could do to encourage more individuals or businesses or whatever to respond to the consultation?
Yes, so the consultation the consultation period's ended, and we've had quite a lot of really good responses. So the report of that, so I've taken all of the responses, summarised the comments, and then in a table then explained our responses as well. There's a number of recommendations that have come from those responses that I've taken to the Climate Change CAG, and the Climate Change CAG has suggested that these recommendations are good. We're going to add it to the net zero strategy. So it's, thanks that everybody took part in the consultation. But this will obviously go to Cabinet, I think on the 2nd of March, to be ratified, that everybody's happy with those extra recommendations from the public.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you. And are we going to do plenty of comms to let members of the public know that their ideas have been taken on board? Because I think that's something that sometimes we miss out on doing, and it's really reinforcing for members of the public to hear that and to know that their ideas are valuable to us, and we take them seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got the... sorry, say that again? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I think working with Hannah in comms, we did have this in our comms plan to be able to promote it, but I think, as you're pointing out, this is a really important thing to say. We took your items on board, but I think what Chris is saying is that there's this table where we've summarised the comments and then explained how we're going to input that. I think will be really quite nice on the website, so everybody can see how it's been taken on board.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions or comments you'd like to make? If not, Scott, thank you very much for coming and sharing with us this evening. Councillor Bayford, was there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I mean, I think everybody's aware that our strategy is a really good one. It's received lots of favourable comments. The changes that are being incorporated, has been said, to come into Cabinet. They will go through, I'm sure of that. But I think the thing to point out is that, by and large, the comments were very positive, very supportive of the strategy, and encouraging, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bayford. Right, members, thank you for coming and sharing with us, officers. And if you wish to depart for sunnier climes, that would be fine, unless you're speaking later
Chairman,
on.
I couldn't pull myself away from this. Nothing, wild horses couldn't drag me away.
Okay, members, thank you. We're moving now on to agenda item number 5, which is concerns the interruption of water supply from Southern Water in our region quite recently. I'm very pleased now to welcome Ms. Elizabeth Wickenden to the microphone, who, as a member of the public and one of our residents, has asked to speak to us this evening, notably on this item. Thank you very much. Please just take your time, and we're all on the same side here.
Okay. Thank you for having me here this evening. My name is Elizabeth Wickenden. I'm a local resident. I grew up in Broadstairs, my first home actually being on the Silvers and the Wimpey Estate in Broadstairs. I have resided since then on the Wimpey Estate from August 2016, when I purchased my house after the breakdown of my marriage. I wanted a fresh start for myself and my 2 children. Since moving back in 2016, there have been, as I have counted them, 13 separate instances where I and my fellow residents have been without water supply. And that was up to the time I sent the letter to Councillor Yates back in December 2022. And since then, in January of 2023 alone, there have been another 5 further incidences of a loss of water supply to the residents. Additionally to the water outages for the residents on the Wimpey Estate, there has also been the issue of traffic through the estate, the first being a burst water main back in December, which caused an increase in local traffic for people getting in and out of the Wimpey Estate. Further to this, when the bottled water stations were set up back in the December loss of water, this again caused a disruption of traffic through the estate. On one occasion, when there was the burst water main, I actually had an eye appointment, which I had to cancel because I was just sat on the estate and not moving in the traffic. To add further insult, the residents, vast majority of us, still have not received any compensation for these losses of water, especially for the December incident when we were out without water for a 36-hour period. From my understanding, some have received compensation, others haven't, and some compensation has actually gone to residents in Thanet who didn't even suffer with the loss of water. The loss of water on so many different occasions has affected local schools and businesses. I myself am a member of the Bannatines Health Club, and we couldn't use the shower facilities because of the loss of water, which means this interrupted when I go for a swim in the evenings after work. I'm also aware a local junior school had to close for a day, and parents had to leave their workplace to go and collect their children from school and take time off to look after them. I mean, the loss of water really does have a big impact on residents' lives. Therefore, I'm asking the Council tonight to please hold Southern Water to account and ask them what their long-term plan is for the water infrastructure in Thanet. There is now an urgent sense of doom amongst local residents that further new housing is being built, and will the current water infrastructure be able to support these new developments? This is now at a critical level, and Thanet District Council need to act on behalf of residents to have this unacceptable situation with Southern Water resolved as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Ms. Wiggin, thank you very much indeed. Could we, thank you for coming and speaking, but do please stay there. Could you just pop the microphone off? Thank you very much. In a moment when people have spoken and there'll be some discussion on the matter, it may be that forms one of the actions that we recommend. But for the meantime, Charles, could we whatever else we may decide, could we make sure that we include that question into the Cabinet or the leader and her discussions with Southern Water to make sure that specific question is asked from this committee on behalf of Ms Wickington. Thank you very much. Councillor Garner, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure most of us as councillors have been contacted by residents about the disruption caused by the growing number of water outages across the district in recent years, especially those of us who live in and represent wards in Broadstairs. The Runfield Water Booster Station, which has been at the heart of most of the issues, sits in my ward on the Wimpy estate, and I've spoken to a large number of residents there whose frustrations and concerns were just concisely captured in the statement from Ms Wickington just now. Their frustrations, as she explained, their frustrations have been compounded by the incompetent way that Southern Water has managed their compensation process for last December's lengthy outage. While some, as explained, while some residents who went without water for nearly 2 days have received nothing, others who saw no interruption in their service have received £100 plus. The company need to urgently address this and sort it out. So Southern Water executives have many questions to answer, and while calling them in to be grilled by councillors on this scrutiny panel, which I'm sure you'll all be voting in favour of, is a start, what the residents of Thanet deserve is for Southern Water to meet with the local community in a public meeting for them to explain themselves. A recent petition launched by another local resident, Liz Larvin, which calls for this to happen, has already attracted 850 signatures, and I would hope that you would echo this call in your debate this evening. With little confidence in Southern Water's infrastructure being capable of maintaining a reliable service for the current residents of Thanet, let alone for the major housing developments planned over the next few years, we also need to consider seeking more information from them as a consultee in the planning process when considering future applications. After all, we would be remiss in our responsibilities to our residents if we were to continue granting permission for more and more large developments before the infrastructure upgrades to cope with them were completed. Thank you.
Councillor Garner, thank you very much. Councillor Yates, you're here substituting for Councillor Keane. Am I to assume, therefore, that you would like to speak her words, as it were, because she was due to speak next on this item?
Well, I think the words have to be mine as they're coming out of my mouth, but Councillor Keane sends her apologies. Thank you very much, Liz, for coming tonight to the meeting. And I'm glad that the issue, which has been going on for a number of years, is finally getting the public scrutiny it needs. And I think Southern Water have already said they're willing to come to the Overview and Scrutiny meeting next month. So I'm hoping tonight that all of us as members will agree that should be the right course of action. Definitely, you've persuaded me already, but hopefully now the people hearing your voice can also be persuaded. So I think there are 3 aspects to this issue from my side. There's the technical issues and whether the short-term technical solutions are adequate enough, and whether there are long-term plans for the area. We don't know because the communications, like you said, have been pretty appalling. Then there's how can we ensure residents do receive the compensation, because it does seem like Southern Water doesn't have a good data set, and some residents are having to be on the phone for 40 minutes to get the compensation that they're fully entitled to, whereas some other residents are getting it automatically. This is just not a clear response, and I think we as a council need to be providing guidance to residents to say this is what you're entitled to and this is how to get it. And lastly, I think I've definitely heard rumours that when the Wimpy estate was built, Southern Water knew the infrastructure was never adequate enough. And then when you look at what's failed lately, which is the booster pump, well, the clue's in the name. It's a booster for the pump, which probably wouldn't be needed if there was adequate infrastructure there. So I think my kind of question to the Chair and potentially Democratic Services is whether the wording we've used in regards to Southern Water coming in can also cover the topics of compensation, and whether it can cover the topics of the adequacy of the pumping solutions there, because from my side, it'd be good to get clarity about exactly what are in the terms of reference for that meeting, which hopefully we'll agree to. And I'll leave it there, but thanks, Liz.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Yates. I was just writing to make sure I got the...
There's others might want to... Are you able to stay for a few more minutes? No, after the agenda item. Sorry.
You scared her away.
Apologies.
Just before, members, just before I pass this over to you, can I just make absolutely sure that I've got the salient points down? There's been a lot of information shared with us, and much of it, of course, has meant really difficult times for local residents on more than one occasion. But we have a question that we consider asking Southern Water to hold them to account and ask them what their longer term infrastructure plan is. Did you want it to stay at longer term, or medium and longer term, or immediate medium and longer term?
I mean, I would think longer term, because the more development that's going to go up across Thanet, the impact it's going to have on the infrastructure. So, and I know there's certain target building plans for the next sort of several years, so I think longer term would be the best.
Thank you very much. So we definitely want to avoid sort of sticking plaster things. Then the other issue that's come up a couple of times is compensation, the way that is being handled or not. And the third major item I picked up was about a public meeting in response to the public's reaction so far. Are those the three members of the main issues? To the committee, are there any comments? Councillor Austin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Groundhog Day, I'm afraid. We're picking up on things that various people have said, and your comment, Chair, about sticking plaster. At the Cabinet meeting where the Green Party motion about Southern Water and the Environment Agency and asking them for more information routinely on large planning applications was discussed, the leader suggested that the most sensible way to go about this might be to ask Southern Water for information on an ad hoc basis as and when applications came in for large developments. This surprised us because it seems an entirely sensible idea to ask for more information, but our motion suggested asking for more information routinely from Southern Water, the Environment Agency, and anybody else who might have information to share that would help us with decisions for our planning committee. That, we believed, would be a useful thing to have. Why would you not want more information? Why would you not ask for more information? Why would you not do that routinely? It seemed to us to be something that would help the planning committee, and I know there were discussions at the planning committee last night that went on at some length, in which water supply, etc., was a consideration. But also, it seemed to us that by doing it that way and by doing that routinely, it would actually reduce effort for officers. It would be something that happened automatically every time, and it would provide more information to the planning committee. Many councils across the country have approved that. We are mystified as to why we haven't approved it here, and we don't understand why the leader suggested what appears to us to be a sticking plaster solution when just doing it routinely would make a lot more sense. We understand the discussion about, yes, we know that Southern Water's problems, many of the problems that they've had, for example, with sewage outages and so on, have been as a result of problems with older properties. But as our speaker has highlighted and Councillor Yates has confirmed, we know that there's going to be a lot more building planned in the area in the future. It cannot but have some kind of impact, and the question about infrastructure plans is absolutely crucial. Why are we not asking for that routinely as part of our planning committee deliberations? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Wing.
I'll follow up on that because I was on that very long planning meeting last night, and it was really great to hear from residents and local councillors who had a bit more insight into one particular planning application where they identified some flooding. So I took the leaders' kind advice to ask Southern Water at a planning meeting, and I asked that question about, you know, I've been in 2 Southern Water meetings where they've clearly said we're not the statutory body, but if we're asked, we will report. And so we're pushing at an open door, it would seem, and utterly failed to make that happen last night, where there was a significant issue over flooding. It's interesting. Thank you for giving information as well. It's really valuable to have information from residents about things. And just listening to you talk, have we got an issue with burst pipes there? Because it seems pretty ironic that we've had a whole series of burst pipes on one particular fairly new estate. And does that point to a really bad planning application and substandard work on your site that's led to a repeated breakdown of burst pipes? So that's one thing that I think could be investigated by who, I've no idea. And I will go back to what I tried to press at the Cabinet meeting where I spoke under 20.1 is we have a long-term issue. If you look at our housing numbers, and I will repeat, I found a document that was commissioned by TDC in 2021 that clearly stated our population growth up to 2040 is going to be 10%. Now, if you look at the expected percentage of housing or numbers of housing that the government has forced upon us, because there is a mythical way of working it out, but nobody seems to be able to explain or show me where this equation of working out numbers that the government's forced upon us. So if you look at our figures for 2030 on a baseline data of existing houses in that document that TDC had commissioned, that 2030 increase in housing represents a 25% increase in our housing within Thanet. If you look at the 2040, if we're forced to have the extra 4,500, I think it is, that's a 32% increase. Now, I think you can automatically assume that those two percentages will be a 25% and a 32% increase in water resources and the production of wastewater, all of which has to be dealt with. And I don't think I was very good at trying to explain what I was talking about. So we've got extra pressure on a system that is already collapsing, okay, which is our first issue. Then we've got discharges, and I understand the discharges. We've got a big tank that when it rains, the big tank fills up because that's a holding tank, and because it fills up, we have to release, or Southern Water have to release sewage into the sea. So let's imagine we've got a tank that fills up to that level on an average day, okay? I'm trying to be as simple as I possibly can, because if we increase the use by 25% or 32% if these numbers are forced upon us, then that tank on an average day will, I assume, will be used, or the percentage of use of or production of wastewater or use of fresh water will be increased by 25% or 32% because people live in those houses. That means the trigger point when it rains is reached quicker because the tank's fuller already, or the capacity is greater being used in that system. What I also need to say is, if we looked at that one development last night, that one little development, we had, and it is pretty shocking when you have somebody on planning that says it's just grass, and that was another development that is now entirely covered in cement and buildings and non-porous issues. We are taking farmland, which is naturally porous, where if it rained, that rain would fall onto the ground and seep through our chalk strata into the aquifer. And we're covering that land, which was porous, in non-porous tarmac, non-porous houses. We're interrupting the natural flow of water into the natural system, and we're forcing it into a man-made system, so from our guttering into our drains and into our sewage system. We don't see any planning applications with grey water harvesting, with porous roads, with porous pavements. If we don't start addressing some of these issues, which are long-term issues, then the only thing that's going to happen is we are going to have more residents sat here moaning about sewage in our seas and moaning about either not having water because the system has collapsed, or the system not being able to deal with the amount of sewage that needs to be treated. And the figures are pretty stark. If we have a 25% increase in housing by 2030 and we're covering more porous land with non-porous stuff, then we are going to have a serious problem. And I don't know how we deal with this, but burying our heads in the sand and not challenging Southern Water and not trying to change our planning is not going to help, is it?
Councillor Wing, thank you very much for that. I don't mean this to sound patronising at all, but I believe I've given you a considerable amount of leeway to broaden the subject a bit from where we started, largely because I think it's good for there to be a big picture painted from time to time. So I hope other panel members won't mind me giving you the time to do that and to cover some of these issues. It does show that it at least as far as this council is concerned, it involves more than one department, more than one group, more than one committee. Perhaps we'll come back onto that in a few moments, but thank you very much for that. Members, are there any other comments? Yes, Councillor Tomlinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on Councillor Wing's mention about the planning and so forth, as Chair of Planning, I've brought this up about Southern Water over at not on every occasion when I have a meeting with Mr. Livingston, and you're right, it's not statutory, but there is concern, as been stated. One of the things which I think, and totally understand the concern of loss of water, we all need water and so on, but everything has in the ground has a time limit, and I think we're seeing, I'm saying Thanet, because that's where I live, it's not just water. We've got issues in Margate, in other towns, in Thanet, with gas. Everything is falling to pieces in the road. There hasn't been, the maintenance until something goes wrong. I mean, many years ago, I used to work on the electricity board, and that was a long, long time ago, on the underground cables. Luckily, they seem to last longer, but I think we're in that situation where it's happening, and of course we don't want it to happen, but we don't know something's going to go wrong until it does go wrong, if I'm making sense. But I totally understand what is being said here, and to say to do maintenance on these pipes, pumps, whatever, quite a difficult one to know when something is going to go wrong, but so I totally understand concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. You raised 3 points that should go forward, and one of those points was actually about a public meeting. I think, and to get Southern Water there, I couldn't agree more with that. But the problem I found, I went to a public meeting in Broadstairs with Southern Water. Councillor Yates was there, Wing was there. That meeting was to impart knowledge to everyone there. If we have a public meeting for the residents for your estate, which I think you're entitled to, most certainly, with the problems you've suffered, that should be for Southern Water to impart the information so they can understand going forward what it will be. It shouldn't be a meeting that gets hijacked for political purposes and reasons. Now, the meeting I attended was hijacked by a KCC councillor who was handing out literature, political literature there. And I think that should be made very clear that if that happens, that person should be removed from the meeting and all the literature as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thanet. I think most of us would share your concerns about meetings being hijacked.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to say these events have caused such an impact on residents. I think the time now is for Southern Water to act, and rather than words, we want actions. And I fully support this matter to be brought back to OSP, and we invite Southern Water to talk to us. A meeting with the public is a good idea, but it's certainly time for action, because this has gone on for so long now, and it's just one thing after another. It's not long before, you know, everybody will be affected by these problems. So yeah, let's get Southern Water to answer some questions and start sorting things out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We all take water for granted, obviously, but thought of not being able to have a shower in the morning, like, fills my OCD with dread, and I just feel for the people of Broadstairs. And I just wondered, I'm not sure I want to ask, I think I'm going to ask Chris Blundell, actually, in his role as the acting deputy chief executive. Is anybody speaking to Southern Water when these events are happening to ask them what the hell's going on? Because it just seems to, I didn't realise there had been so many, and it seems, you know, such a regular occurrence.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. When these events happen, there are protocols that are set up across the district with the relevant agencies. Without being too derogatory about Southern Water, they're quite often absent from the table in terms of when we're wanting to have these conversations with them. They often don't attend the meetings that have been set up, and they can be lacking in terms of the engagement that we have with them. So are they just a standalone body with no one to answer to? Is it us they answer to? Is it KCC they answer to? The Department of Environment? Who do they answer to? Without using Councillor Bayford's words exactly, but they're a private company ultimately, and they've got the regulatory framework around. You've got the office, Ofwat, I believe it is, who will be considering their performance, but they're accountable to the government. I would say, in terms of the management of water companies, we can only sort of ask for engagement with them as a local authority.
Thank you both very much. I wonder if I could ask, I'm not sure whether it would be yourself, Mr. Blundell, or whether it would be yourself who could give us some advice on one particular issue. Clearly, the matter of compensation is an important one. I just want to try and get an idea as to whether or not the council has any right or responsibility to get involved in compensation claims which are largely for individuals. Are we allowed to do that, or would it be our role to ask for a general explanation of compensation so that we don't get drawn into acting as kind of agents or go-betweens? I'm sorry if that sounds like I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I'm just wondering about the business of compensation. Where would we stand lawfully, legally, within that? And I'm sorry, I'm not sure which of you to ask about that.
I can just give a general answer. Chris explained that they aren't a statutory body, so they're a private body. And if they do come to the table for discussions, then we can have that discussion about compensation, the general discussion. we're limited in our powers to force them to make any decisions about compensation.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. An option here to add the interruption of water supply, Southern Water, to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel work programme for 2022-23 and invite Southern Water to the March panel meeting, or an option not to add that item to the work programme but to agree on a different course of action regarding this matter. For myself, I think the compensation is that will unfold fairly quickly. Hopefully, the longer term structure and strategy might take a bit more than the 3.5 weeks or so that are left before the next meeting. So could I offer an option to March or April as option one? Or, of course, the other option is to agree on a different course of action entirely.
Chair, just to say, I think don't give the option of March or April. I think we invite them to March.
Okay. Councillor Huxley.
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay. So the option then is to invite them to the March meeting, which is March the 14th. Can I have a show of hands, members? Okay, that's unanimous. We will take that course of action, please. And I'm guessing that that would involve the leader and cabinet members as well as officers to be invited as well to attend. I realise it's going to be after hours, but we need to set up a proper opportunity for them to do that. Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, Chairman, I know I'm not sort of part of this process really, but I mean, one of the things I would have thought was quite important and bring people along, then they're going to have a fairly limited amount of time with us. I think that the questions to be asked need to be advised to them, and maybe the panel should decide which of those are most important. And one of the things I would say, if you start talking about compensation, I don't know if anybody saw South East today, I think it was last night, and they were talking about compensation. And if you start a conversation about that, you get into the fact that if there's decided it's unusual weather, the compensation payments which are laid down statutorily don't have to be paid, and the people that decide whether the weather's bad enough or not are the water companies. So I'm not sure how sort of useful a discussion about compensation would be. I would have thought the questions about, you know, infrastructure and what they're doing for the future and that was important, but I would have thought if the panel could come up with sort of 1, 2, 3 questions and give them advanced knowledge. Otherwise, you've also got the option they come along and say, well, didn't actually prepare for that question, but here's one I will talk about.
Need to be specific about what it is we want them to come. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think probably just in response to that, I would prefer to go down the route of these are the broader subjects that we're going to be asking questions about, because, you know, it may well come to me 2 hours before the meeting that actually this is a really salient point that needs to be asked, and then we lose that opportunity. So I would prefer to go down the route of, you know, if we're going to do that, here is X, Y, and Z subject, and we submit that to them.
Thank you for that. Of course, what we don't want to do is overload the plate with too many questions so that no specific questions are addressed specifically. I think that's the point that you were making. Councillor Yates.
Yeah, just to say that Southern Water should hopefully be watching this live stream or watching it on playback, so I think they'll know exactly what the topics are, and we can only hope that they will actually come having watched this meeting and with the answers to hand, because otherwise why would they already agree to be coming to an overview and scrutiny meeting? So I don't think we need to be like too precise, because if they're doing their job they should be watching this meeting right now. Thanks.
or perhaps being encouraged to watch the recording of it at a later date if they are in fact absent from the virtual table as well. So thank you for that. The March meeting is not too far away, so that needs to be done specifically. Do you, I'll need to get the protocol correct on this one. Would it be the leader of the council who writes to them and asks them? Would it be me, or should it be the cabinet member with responsibility for that, so that the person doing the writing is the person within the council who has responsibility for that?
I think, Chair, the task lies with you as chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel, who is, it's the panel that has decided to invite Southern Water, and the signature and the invitation should come from you. Okay. You may want to seek support from the lead officers, senior officers, in putting together that draft letter.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that advice. We will do that then. And of course, it is worth noting that these things are ongoing, and I do know that the leader and officers are in regular contact with Southern Water, so efforts are being made. So sometimes these meetings, they move much slower than actual life itself, and hopefully that's one of the things that will happen here, that events will overtake the meetings. But we will do that, and everybody, you're welcome, members, if you've had particular points you wish to raise. If you contact me within the next, let's say by Tuesday, with specifics, then I can try and make sure that we get the letter phrased in a way that meets your requirements. Thank you very much for your input. We now move then to agenda item number 6, the corporate performance for Q2, and speaking under Rule 20.1, we have Councillor Whitehead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, is there feedback or is it just me? Just me. Okay. In relation to housing, there are areas of concern which have been well discussed across many previous meetings. As an ongoing area of concern, the number of households in temporary accommodation has increased from 115 in June 2021 to 195 now, which I believe reflects external pressures and property inflation rather than housing performance, and will hopefully be addressed by further growth of the in-house temporary accommodation service. But in terms of empty properties brought back into use, there does seem to have been a significant drop recently, down from 45 to 35. I'm not certain whether this links to a monitoring change or is simply a general decrease. If the latter, I was wondering whether Overview and Scrutiny would consider it useful to advertise the work of No Use Empty more, so that homeowners are aware of the range of help available to bring properties back into use. Also, just as a matter of note, the pollinators and open spaces graph seems to be the same as the trees graph, so I was wondering if we have the information relating to pollinators and open spaces available tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. I'm now going to ask Chris Blundell if he'd like to present his report, and there may be some answers that you have to those points already.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So I'm standing in for our Director of Communications, Hannah Thorpe, tonight. Unfortunately, she's unwell, so she's not able to make it. She has prepared a script for me to run through tonight. I will do my best to present the report and answer any questions that the committee may have. So, as the report sets out, as part of the Council's corporate performance process, 39 key performance indicators are monitored to provide an indication of how the Council is performing. They do not look at every aspect of the Council services and the data the Council collects, but provide an overview of progress against the Council's key corporate priorities. Individual teams and services track other indicators at a service level which are not reported on corporately. The data for most of the corporate indicators is now available live to view on our website, which members can see at any time. It has been agreed that 6 monthly reports on the Council's corporate performance will be shared with the Committee, Overview and Scrutiny Panel, to provide an opportunity for members to more closely review the direction of travel of our key service areas. This will allow sufficient time for action and issues to be resolved between committee meetings And as the data for the corporate performance indicators are now available to view on the website at any time. This report identifies the data as at the end of quarter 2, July to September 2022. The data is captured within a new format which is explained within paragraph 2.4 of the report. In addition to the summary, the more detailed graphs are also presented in Annex 1. They are provided to give a wider view of the direction of travel for each indicator. The intention is, The intention is to return to the overview and scrutiny panel after the election, setting out the position as at the end of quarter 4, so that will be the performance for the whole of the financial year. We will ensure that the reports are timed earlier in the year so that members are discussing data when it is more up to date. In relation to your precise questions, Councillor, I can't. I'm afraid I can't comment on the data that you're referring to in terms of the trees and the biodiversity indicator. I can see from what the charts are showing there is an issue in terms of the data that's being presented. I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that at hand in terms of the pollinators, but we can get a written response to. In terms of the numbers of residents in temporary accommodation, that is something that clearly is a priority for the whole council. Financially, I can obviously comment on that in the terms of strain that we've seen on our budgets, and that's being reflected in next year's budget in terms of the additional money we're putting in to temporary accommodation, and also the investment that we're looking to make into the provision of our own units going forward. But happy to, that probably doesn't answer your question fully, I'm afraid, but happy to answer any supplementary questions or any other questions that the committee may have.
Councillor Whitehead, supplementary?
No, that's fine. Obviously, I understand the circumstances surrounding this. Yeah, in relation to empty homes, do you know if there has been a change in recording or whether we are just seeing a drop coming back into use?
Again, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough with the data set. It's probably a question I'll need to refer on to Mr. Bob Porter to answer that question and get a response back to you. Sally, I know that's not your specific service area either, so it'll be one that we'll need to get back to you, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yates.
Thanks, Chair. Again, this might be a tough question considering the circumstances. So 2.19 of the report, summary table of performance for indicators tracking the corporate priority, which is efficiency. Number of complaints has increased from 45 to 113, which looks like it's the actual maximum we've ever received, so it's a record high number of complaints. Do you know what these complaints are in regards to? Thanks.
Sure. We have obviously we're as a local authority, we provide a wide range of services, and we get complaints covering the whole spectrum, from mist bins to housing placements to fly tipping, very topical at the moment. So I know in terms of the complaint number, we've actually gone through a bit of a real purge and thrown a lot of resources at that recently, and our complaints numbers are well down on the data obviously that's presented in this report, because it's showing information at the end of September. I'd be very hopeful when you look at the next data set and live data, we'll be able to show a much improved position. Doesn't mean that all residents' concerns have been resolved. All I can say is that we've been able to answer a lot of the outstanding complaints. There was a quite significant backlog, particularly going back to September last year. I think that's fair commentary in terms of what the data is showing and what was experienced in reality. But complaints, I think if I was going to speak generally, a large proportion typically tend to relate to operational services. So I appreciate I've got the portfolio holder here, because it's something that interfaces with every resident. So mist bins and the like typically make up the majority when you're looking at it, but obviously it spans across the whole range of services that we provide.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bacon.
Well, I just agree with Chris. I mean, I think a lot of the complaints are about op services, lots about missed bins, but one of the things I can report, we haven't quite finished the year yet, but 11 months in, the number of missed bins in the last 11 months is probably over 50% down on what it was before. So there's a huge service improvement. So hopefully, as Chris has said, complaints will be going down as well. But I'm sure that op services are in there because, you know, it's the thing people get very worked up about. You know, a missed bin is a source of anger and frustration.
But also, sorry, just to add to that, just building on my point, it is a service we provide on a weekly basis to every household, well, at least, you know, across the district. So it clearly has the ability to generate a large volume of complaints because it has a personal impact on people's lives. If your bin isn't collected, it's a source of inconvenience at best for a week or so. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we empty 6 million containers every year. So missing 1 or 2 is bound to happen.
I tend to work in smaller figures. I think it's about 18,300 bins a day. But that's a lot of bins, but to every family the bin's been missed, it is a problem. There are some we know that are geographical. Buxton Road in Ramsgate, for example, turning into Highbury Gardens, almost impossible to get the new trucks around there. And for weeks now, their bins have been missed and I get buried with phone calls. It's an important issue that we need to address. And perhaps we need to look at ways of more people becoming what's called assisted collection. It's a keyhole, that road, and it's only 20 yards from front to back. It's got some elderly people in there, and that would certainly solve the issue if the people were given, the operators were given the time. But that's a specific one. I don't expect you to comment on specific ones.
Chair, sorry to keep banging on about bins, but since we're talking about it, there is an actual indicator for it. If you look at page 42 of the agenda pack, we've got percentage of properties where bins collected successfully. I mean, the numbers I think are quite remarkable when you think about the volume we're dealing with, 99.7% success rate. I mean, for any other industry or organisation, there'd be a staggering sort of success rate in terms of level of failure versus throughput.
I've got to get them in the right order. Councillor Boyd.
Thank you. This is just a sneaky one, just to follow on from what Councillor Yates has said. Obviously, we're seeing the complaints figures. Is there a ballpark figure? And this won't be for Chris to answer, I don't think, anyway. But if you can send it on to Paulie Hannah, that'd be great. Is there a ballpark figure as to the amount of complaints that is expected? Obviously, no organisation is perfect. You are going to get complaints. And I also wondered if there's a flip side to this as well, as to has the increase potentially shown that maybe it's a much easier process for residents to air their concerns and give feedback, just as because I like to be a bit optimistic. But I just wondered whether there was a bit more detail in that perhaps might cast a bit of light what's going on.
Chair, through you. In terms of benchmarking, it's very difficult to say ultimately should always be our target should be 0 complaints, but that's some sort of utopian world that I don't think we're ever really going to operate in, given the circumstances that, just the world we operate in. It's important to say that in general, the way our data is presented, we don't set targets anymore. That was one of the sort of key decisions that was made in terms of how we're looking and managing performance. Very much now looking at trends rather than how far we are above or below targets, because there can be sort of perverse incentives or weird outcomes if you set targets can drive behaviour in ways that you wouldn't necessarily want it to. But we can certainly track the direction of where complaints have gone over the last few years or period of time. And I can give you a breakdown. We've got we track it by service area. So if it's something the committee would like to see a little bit more around in terms of complaints data, we could bring that forward and show how complaints have tracked against different service areas over the last, well, I'll have to have a look at the data, but of a relevant period of time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ossing.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask another probably impossible for Chris to answer question, which follows on from Councillor Boyd's, which is about the business about residents' perceptions of value for money, which doesn't look great, and how that compares with previous years or how that compares with benchmarking with other councils.
Value for money is a difficult one because it's subjective to a degree in terms of whether a resident thinks the council offers value for money. It's something that I have actually worked with Hannah because we ask it as part of the resident survey. It's directly linked actually in terms of the council tax we charge and whether residents think that offers value for money. Again, we haven't got benchmarking data to hand, and different councils ask the question slightly differently, which can lead to a different response. But value for money, if I recall correctly, had been improving in recent years, and I think it plateaued in the last year or so. But again, that's something I can get Hannah to provide an answer in terms of it's something we look at and we analyse when we get the resident survey results. So I can certainly arrange for a response to be handled there. The other thing to bear in mind, this is probably a little bit territory a little bit more comfortable for me in terms of council tax. Not all authorities will set the same level of council tax, and that can just be because of the way the finances are set. London borough authorities are renowned for having much lower levels of council tax than other types of authorities, and that's just because of the peculiarities of the way local authorities are financed. So it's not necessarily a fair question to compare one authority to the other because of the particular circumstances. Sorry, that's probably a question dodged rather than answered. So.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wing.
Just going back to the complaints, because it's relative to us as well, because if there's been a reduction in your complaints, there's definitely a reduction in the complaints to us. So if you go to bins, but I'm just wondering whether, when a complaint comes in, whether we actually either speak to the crews or speak to the residents themselves to ask why they think their bin was missed and whether there's a solution. So 4 streets which have been a bit of a problem in Central Harbour have been, because I've not had a complaint for weeks, I would say the whole of 2023. It was Ashburnham Road and Spencer Walk, where 2 crews met in the middle and collected bins, and it was the houses in the middle that were being misted. On Spencer Street there's a little bollard in the road, which is the guiding point, residents are telling me. And then on Townley Street, I waited for the crews because they'd missed it for 3 weeks about 2 years ago. So I waited for the crew, and the crew told me they just can't get around the corner because of parked cars. So very often I think when a complaint comes in, do we deal with it, or do we actually say to the residents or talk to the crews and say, why is the bin constantly missed? And very often the residents even know why the bin's been missed, or they know the solution to the bin not being missed in the future. So I just wondered if do we sort of look at that aspect of a complaint?
I'm mindful I'm talking about a lot about bin collection when I've got the portfolio holder sat next to me. He probably knows more about it. In general terms, I think any feedback from residents is useful for us to understand service failures or just general feedback in terms of performance. The other thing to bear in mind in terms of missed bins, I think that's helped us improve performance, is the Bartek system that we've got now in terms of, so we have cameras on the freighters that allows us to document and record whether bins were actually presented for collection. Previously we didn't have that sort of evidence that could document whether a bin was there, and it led to some contention perhaps between the service and the residents. That's a really useful tool for us now, and the in-cab technology for the driver to mark it, say that bin was in or out, again gives us much greater visibility of actually what we've got and better record keeping. But it's probably better if I defer to the portfolio holder in terms of anything that's specific to sort of the way a particular street, or I don't want to get too involved in the details of that, but Councillor Bayford, did you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, fact is that obviously the service attempts to do the best job it can't always do it. I know that there has been a change. I think there's been a lot more supervision that's got involved, and supervisors do in fact talk to residents where there are particular problems. I think there were issues when at one stage the complaints would just come straight through to the sort of complaints handlers, which tended to be on, you know, exec secretaries doing the job, and they weren't in fact equipped to be able to answer specifically about things, so got stock answers, and people are already angry because the bin's been missed and whatever, and somebody sort of saying, well, I don't know, but I'll find out, and then going off and having to find out. I think that's changed. Supervisors are much more involved now. Bartek's been mentioned. We haven't done it yet, but I'm advised that we should be in a position at some stage to be able to go back to these people who claim their bin's been missed when we know the bin wasn't out there. You know, we've got CCTV on the wagons and we can do that. Unfortunately, the service has to operate at such a sort of level of efficiency that it can't really spend too much time doing some of these extra things. So in some respects, it's sort of easier to sort of, you know, not go back and say, oi, Mrs. Jones, you know, our vehicle was down here at, you know, 7 o'clock and your bin wasn't, you know. But, you know, we're looking at sort of trying to address the really tricky ones. I mean, you've talked about specific roads. I know, in fact, that Mark Greening personally has gone out to meetings at various roads, and it is very, very difficult. What I would say is that, you know, there is no advantage to the crews missing bins. You know, they get their collars felt when we get these reports coming in. You know, Bartek actually gives us the evidence to sort of say, well, you know, you should have been able to collect that bin, and why didn't you? So I think watch this space. It's getting better all the time. One thing I would say is that we've been asked by Bartek if we can send representatives along to a conference they're holding as an example of really good practice, because apparently we use this system far more effectively than other local authorities that pay for it. And I'd say this drop in missed bins is you know, proof of that, really.
Almost tempted to ask you if you could say that a bit louder, Councillor Bayford. Yes, Councillor Curry.
Thanks, Chair. As we're talking about bins, and I'm a Cliftonville West councillor, I couldn't be left out, I'm afraid, but what I'm going to talk about is recycling. Yeah, I've noticed our recycling rates. We started off from a 30% level. We seem to be up to about 34.5%. I have seen all the new recycling bins along the high streets, which are fantastic. Really are making a difference. I did speak to Mark Greening, and they are being used, and more people are realising there's mixed recycling on their high streets, tin, glass, plastic. We're a little bit short on areas where people can recycle paper and card, but really good to see these containers that are being used. I just wanted to ask you, Councillor Bayford, is there a recycling percentage that we're aiming at? It'd be nice to get this figure up, and I'm sure it will help with all these communal bins, but I just wondered if there was a figure that we were looking at or that we had to achieve.
To my shame, I can't give you that figure. I mean, all I can tell you is that obviously the higher recycling rate we can get, the better it is. But again, you know, there's quite a lot of misunderstanding about recycling as well. You know, I mean, we get quite a few irate people saying, oh, you know, we want to recycle, but we can't. You know, why can't you send a wagon down? But, you know, the cost of recycling in some cases is really prohibitive. You know, the cost of doing it wouldn't be rewarded by the return we get, but obviously we are looking to do that. And there are some places where, I mean, for instance, we've got Councillor Huxley here, when we've got one road where we don't collect food waste. The residents are very upset about that, but it would be very expensive to arrange to do it. I would say that you know, Mark Greening, I think, is doing a first-class job. I mean, I think he's very much on the ball. He's very aware of you know, the need to get the recycling up. One point in passing, it might be worth mentioning. We often get complaints about lack of collecting of recycling from communal bins, you know, where there are blocks of flats and things like that. And the main reason we don't collect it is that the recycling gets contaminated. When it's contaminated, it's down to the management company of the block of flats to deal with it, not down to us.
Chair, sorry if I could just add to that further as well. I think it's fair to say our rate is lower than other authorities in terms of recycling. For the reasons Councillor Bayford set out, sometimes there are significant cost implications of addressing that. We've also got demographic challenges in terms of deprivation, which has been shown to correlate with lower recycling rates. Some of the geographical, topographical issues in terms of getting the vehicles around narrow streets and the like can cause problems. We're aware that the Environment Act is likely to set higher targets that we're going to be bound to achieve. I think I've been doing a quick Google because I couldn't remember the exact figure. If my Googling is accurate, it'd be 65% by 2035. So that's a radical shift change in terms of where we are now, and would require not only an investment in resource in the service, but a change in service configuration if we're going to be able to achieve the targets that are set out in that Act.
Thank you. Councillor Huxley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think at the moment it's 50% plus that each council should be recycling. That's the target, and as you say, it's going up. And then things like food waste, I think by about 2025, TDC should be collecting all domestic food waste, So where the money's coming from to do that, I don't know. But that's so the Environment Bill is pushing the levels up. Some councils get to about 80% recycling, so I can't remember which ones. But, that's good. So, there's a lot of scope for us to do better. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone, for all the comments. Thank you, Councillor Bayford, for being here and taking ad hoc questions like that, because I know I wasn't expecting you, but thank you so much for facilitating the discussion. So, members, we're asked, unless there are specific recommendations you wish to make, we are asked to note this latest performance report for quarter number 2. Are we happy to do that? Thank you very much. Thank you again. Moving on then to agenda item number 7. And before I call on Sally O'Sullivan to introduce the report, Councillor Whitehead, speaking under Rule 20.1, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a genuinely brief statement to say that I welcome this report and the huge amount of effort that has gone into bringing all actions up to date since housing was brought in-house. I know how much effort it has taken from housing, and significant progress has been made across an exceptionally difficult time. I would also like to say that I welcome the further contract to speed up the commendable progress on EICRs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sally O'Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, this is my quarter 2 report, not quarter 1, which I think are in the notes. That was probably my fault, sorry. Overall, our performance remains steady, with areas that we are actively working on to see further improvements. For our compliance update, most of our work streams are operating as business as usual now, and areas where we are struggling to improve are as follows. Legionella actions, where we've got 13 actions still outstanding. These are due to no access to properties. FRAs, where we have a total of 111 actions outstanding with 67 overdue. We continue to make progress with actions, but this has stalled because our project surveyor that was working on this has unfortunately left, and they were dedicated to carrying out a majority of them. We are disappointed that the domestic electrical safety compliance is at 91.3 and hasn't really moved further forward. EICRs are being completed. For example, 88 were completed in September, and this is indicative that MERS are keeping on top of the current programme but cannot cope with anything over and above. To address this, we're procuring our own contractors that will be ready to start in Q3, and MERS have taken on further contractor to meet current demand. To end that on a high note, gas compliance remains at 100%. Our operational performance, our gas calls performance remains steady. Customer service stats have declined, but we believe this is due to the low amount of returns which skew figures rather than actual performance. This contract is coming to an end in 2023, therefore the rate of returns for surveys is something we'll pick up with the new contractor as part of the new contract. Mears continues to perform well. Even though customer satisfaction has dropped, the score is still very high at 90%, and the quality of workmanship is confirmed by our post-inspections. A new set of KPIs have been agreed as part of the contract extension with Mears, which will be until March 2025, and this should help drive performance. Our capital programme spend is a bit low for this time of year. We would rather it be nearer around 50% at that point. But capital programme progress is going as we would hope. Where we've been unable to spend monies on the kitchen and bathroom contract, where the contractor went into administration at the end of Q1, and where we are mobilising the window replacement programme and haven't spent any money yet. This also had an impact on our voids performance. As you can see, performance fell in Q2 because Mears diverted resource from the voids team to finish the outstanding kitchens and bathrooms where the contractor downed tools midway through. Mears have employed another subcontractor to provide additional resource so we can see improvement so we hope to see improvement over the second part of the year. Finally, our arrears percentage has increased during Q2, and this is of no surprise considering what's happening nationally. What is reassuring, though, is that even though arrears have increased in this quarter, in comparison to this time last year and the year before, there is an overall reduction. We've also reached out to neighbouring local authorities and find that we are all experiencing the same kind of increase in arrears. What is positive is that residents are engaging really well with us as we have had an increased referrals to our financial wellbeing team. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Sally. Members? Councillor Ossing.
I just want to say thank you and how impressive it is to get this level of detail. It really is very reassuring, and even where you can see that there's maybe not the progress that you were hoping to make, to have the explanation as to why is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Unless there are specific recommendations we wish to make, we are asked to note. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Keane, I didn't see it.
Definitely not Councillor Keane. Unless I've changed my hair.
I've got this right eye that's a bit...
It's catching that.
I've got this right eye which is a bit
Thank you for your report, Sally, as ever. Just want to ask a question on the day-to-day responsive repairs in Mears, and whether you could just expand a little bit more on, for the last 2 quarters, the urgent jobs percentage completed on time has dropped. So it was 100% Q3 and 4, but Q1 and 2 it's 97 for both Q1 and Q2. And I think that, but then obviously average days to complete non-urgent works is improving. So I just wondered if you could just expand a bit more about that in terms of, because they kind of conflict each other in terms of urgent and non-urgent.
Sorry, part of the reason why we have changed the KPI suite, what this indicates is some of the jobs that are going overdue, but we're not properly capturing, and also jobs that go overdue and across periods as well, which is difficult to kind of quantify in terms of how the KPIs are currently laid out. So I believe that in actual fact that more jobs are being completed, and this is kind of indicative of we have got less jobs that are currently in the works in progress, so live jobs have reduced, which means more jobs are being completed quicker, but I'm not sure why the urgent jobs are showing as coming down right now, but I can find out for you. One of the KPIs we're introducing is the amount of jobs that are going overdue. And that should, of course, drive performance, because we should never have jobs overdue. And, of course, we will give them a little bit of a leniency either side. But that would hopefully where these don't capture the statistics particularly well, that would hopefully show why we're not, why that figure has come down, if that makes sense. All right.
Thank you very much. Members, are we happy to note the report then? The comments? Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item number 8, HRA Tower Blocks Refurbishment and Retrofit Programme. Before I invite Sally O'Sullivan to bring us a report, once more we turn to Councillor Whitehead, please, under Rule 20.1.
Thank you, Chair. This is a huge and entirely necessary undertaking, and I've spoken of its importance in earlier meetings. I have also raised my concerns in relation to whether the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund will provide sufficient support for us to do what we need to do across stock long term. But this is a necessary start, and the tower blocks are also exactly the right place to begin this, considering the level of need in terms of structure and energy efficiency. I would like to say a huge thank you to all the officers involved in making these bids. I know how time-consuming they are, and I hope that we achieve the results that we need to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. Sally O'Sullivan, please. Thank you.
Okay, so this report gives more detail on the funding of this project and how we will award contracts and the personnel required to mobilise the contracts. We want to take advantage of the funding opportunities available to us to deliver approximately £17 million worth of work. These works will improve fire safety with the replacement of the external wall insulation, improve structural safety by carrying out any concrete repairs required, improve energy efficiency with a number of proposed retrofit measures, including replacing windows and heating, improving the condition of the blocks with cyclical works that include decoration to internal areas, repair, decorate or replace flooring, and the refurbishment of balconies. The funding allows us to carry out all of these works at once, reducing cost and disruption to residents. For example, using the current estimates, external funding will pay for approximately 70% of the cost of the project, with 30% coming from the HRA budget. Our focus has been on speed of delivery for this project to ensure we remain eligible for the funding we have applied for, hence the route to market we have selected and the partnering contractors we have selected, as the report explains. This report gives further detail on the works we intend to undertake, the costs of the work and the ancillary costs of running the project and the different funding streams to demonstrate the value for money that can be achieved with this route. If there are any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wing.
I've just got one, actually. I'm so glad the work's being done, and thank you for sourcing the money, because I know it's been quite complicated, hasn't it, trying to go through all this. But the one thing I wanted to do, in Harbour Towers, we've got a combination of homeowners and tenants. Will there be any cost to those people that actually own their own homes to any aspect of any of the work that will be done? And will there be some sort of consideration of the homeowner's ability to actually pay that money, given that in Harbour Towers I know that some of the residents are elderly and not working?
Okay, thank you. Yes, there will be a cost to leaseholders. As I've said, about 70% in this current estimate will be covered with grant funding, and leaseholders will not have to pay for anything that's covered by grants. The EWR, the external wall replacement, which is being fully funded by Homes England, and that is done so that leaseholders are not impacted financially, is quite a large proportion of this work. For the application of Social Housing Decarb Fund, they won't pay for the part that is funded. Leaseholders are entitled to some infill works with the Social Housing Decarb Fund, and also with this funding, leaseholder contribution is capped. I'm working with the legal team right now as to exactly what the cap is and how we would apply that. With the cyclical works, as with all cyclical works, we have to leaseholders have to pay their percentage that they would owe as per their leasehold agreement. But if you remember, with Royal Crescent, we put a report to Cabinet which asked Cabinet to approve if we could set the figure against the property, so they didn't have to pay it at that time, and that would be on a case-by-case basis. Now, as we get further down this line, if that is appropriate, we could approach Cabinet again to see if that is something that we can do for these leaseholders. Regardless, where we do have high service charges, leaseholders can approach us for a repayment agreement rather than having to pay it off all at once.
Councillor Huxley, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sally. It's a big bit of work, as Councillor Whitehead has said. Massive. Just a couple of questions. You talk about Harbour Towers being retrofitted. What about Brunswick Court? It's exactly the same size. I know we talked about it a long time ago. It's the same size, same number of flats, I think, built at the same time. Why isn't that being retrofitted? And good news, you say in your report that local people will probably get apprenticeships and works during the building, which I think is great, so they get training and things like that, so that's excellent. And are there any penalty fees on mayors if they don't deliver on time and to the budget that you set? Thank you.
Okay, so if I start off with your question about Brunswick Court. So Brunswick Court was left out of this specific programme because it doesn't have external wall insulation that needs to be replaced immediately, whereas the other blocks do. And this, 5 tower blocks was kind of felt like it was quite a big enough project as it was, and because we are using a blended funded approach, it was easy to run the same approach across those 5 tower blocks, and whereas trying to include Brunswick into that with a slightly different approach would have added complexity to a project which is already highly complex. Brunswick will get its turn. But once we've got started on this project and we can start looking at what other funding opportunities are coming up through social housing decarb funding, and where we will turn to next. But it's not forgotten about. In terms of penalty fees for mayors if they don't deliver on time and on budget, it's reputationally for mayors, they've got a lot at stake here. Because they are partnering with us to deliver this, and they know the time scales that are required to do that. Written into the contracts that we use do give us the power to apply penalties if they don't deliver on time and to budget, but that will all be driven through the contracts that we use.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yates.
Thank you very much, Sally, and as I mentioned before, this is a really exciting piece of work. Just one question on kind of deadlines. So we as councillors can obviously speak to you and bring you into meetings, but what are the kind of key deadlines that are being set for this project, and how can we kind of keep our eye on them to make sure that we're on track going forwards? Thanks.
So the key deadline will start once we know if we've been successful in getting the social housing decarbonisation funding. Once we know that, we then have 24 months to deliver, with 2 months overhang at the other end to pay off the final invoices. Anything that we don't spend out of that funding that's awarded to us will have to be returned after that time. So that is what specifically gives our deadline. I've made this into a 3-year contract because obviously things like the cyclical works can come outside of the social housing decarb funding works. So we would obviously front load the works that are dependent on the funding to make sure that we could take full advantage of that. To keep this programme on track and to ensure quality and also that the quantities that we are paying are correct, we are employing a third-party consultant surveyor to assist us with that. They will do all the QSing for us. This is obviously highly complex. We don't have the technical skills in-house to know the quality of works that we're receiving, so we need help with that. They will also help us keep this to time as well.
Can I just ask a supplementary? Thanks, Chair. Just, excuse me if I haven't read, if you've written this down in the report, but when is the funding when do we expect to know whether we've been successful or not? Thanks.
End of February, middle of March-ish, if I can have that caveat.
Thank you. Councillor Townend.
Do your contracts have a retention clause?
Yes, they will have a retention clause on there. We will hold back 10% of the final figure for 1 year defect period. That would give them, that obviously incentivises them to complete any defects that might occur during that settling 1 year period after they've completed works.
Thank you very much. Councillor Booth.
Thank you, Chair. As often I do, I'd just like to say thanks to Sally for 2 very clear and detailed reports, and for her explanations for statistics that are not as progressive as we would like them to be. I think this is appreciated by everybody, so thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Members, then we are asked to note this report. I'd be happy to do so. Thank you very much. We now turn to agenda item number 9, the review of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel work programme. Do members have any comments to make on the work programme as it sits before us at the moment? Perhaps looking at this then, on the 14th of March, we're going to be writing to our Southern Water, which isn't currently on this printed format. We've got a collaboration working party report and a review of the programme. I had spoken earlier about the possibility of having an update on declaring an interest, pecuniary or otherwise, at meetings. There was a slight breakdown occurred at the last meeting in that some with a declared interest to make were not allowed to speak at all. Some with a declared interest to make were allowed to speak and then leave the room. I just wonder whether as a group we could ask for the training post the elections, or if not in April beforehand, a serious update on what declaring an interest really is, what it should be, and the consequences of so doing. I know this is rather personal to me, but I know there were other councillors who were involved. Because a declaration of interest was either made, or in my case, absented from the meeting because of it, and it was under fees and charges, it meant that they could not vote on any part of the budget because we didn't. And I did notice the one time you did, but it meant because the budget included fees and charges, if you follow the logic of having not been allowed to vote on it, then you shouldn't have voted on the budget. And that disenfranchises, I believe, members of this committee. So I'm asking if we think, as a committee, we could do with an update on exactly what we should and shouldn't declare, and whether such a thing in future might disenfranchise people in terms of voting on the entire budget itself, part of which, of course, is fees and charges.
Yeah, I agree, Chair. I think definitely we should be looking at that. I think it was the craziness of someone having a parking permit had to just pull out of the voting of the whole budget, which we're all involved in things in Thanet. We're all council tax payers. You know, we pay council tax. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about council tax? You know, so I think, you know, pulling out of the whole conversation of the budget because you have a car parking permit was the craziest thing that we were told to do.
Well, I think as Mr. Howes used to say in his heyday, we all have a special dispensation on things like allowances and parking permits. I just want, my main question for you members really is, do we try and get an informative update for April, or do we get a substantial update put into the training programme, which we know is coming, and some of us have been involved in discussions about that, post-elections, really? Was that one of the questions?
I was just going to say, from the point of view of the member training group, we know that there is a substantial programme planned, and it seems sensible to try to fit that in there for new members and returning members, and for that to be clarified, on day one, as it were, as part of the new members training.
Thank you. Councillor Wing.
I mean, that is confusing because I also have a parking permit, but I suspect everybody in this room has bought a parking ticket. So none of us, and I was the one that went, oh my God, I've got a parking permit. A parking permit is exactly the same as any one of us buying a parking ticket. So there are some bits of declaring an interest that it's really important that interests are declared, but I find really difficult and actually really not sensible. And I did vote in the other aspects of that budget meeting, like you noticed, because what has the fact I've got a parking ticket got to do with spend on the pool?
The point I was making was that the budget includes fees and charges, and if you're excluded from any debate or voting on fees and charges, you are therefore excluded from. And there were three of us who did. We were excluded from all of it, which I felt meant I was disenfranchised.
Well, I used my common sense and my fairly high education to make my own decision, which was I'm not going to vote on fees and charges, but I am going to vote on the other bits. Because it's bonkers. Because I couldn't understand why you weren't voting. I'm thinking this is totally disfranchised. And if we've all bought a parking ticket in the last year, then none of us should have voted on anything.
Well, indeed, I've got to confess, I was kind of making a point. You can't complain about being disenfranchised until you have been.
Well, surely we've been given the wrong legal advice, haven't we? You've been given the wrong legal advice by the TDC legal department.
Just a matter of consistency, really. There are two issues. You either can speak on something if you declared an interest and then not take part in the debate and not take part in the vote, or you can't speak at all.
But Councillor Wing was in the full council meeting, weren't you? When the fees and charges were talked about and voted on. Okay, but you were in the meeting, whereas you weren't in the meeting of the overview and scrutiny.
That's where it gets confusing.
Yes.
The rules are not clear.
So I think the view is yes, Councillor Thomas.
One, I can't agree with Councillor Wing. I know you'll shout at me, but a parking ticket and a parking permit to me is completely different. I buy parking tickets if I have to. I'm not going to park the car in Clifton. We'll walk to this office. But also something that's concerned, and I've been here a long time now, all of us, as we know, have their own interests in life. And some of those interests can come up within council. Now, I think some people might know what I'm talking about here, and recently it hasn't happened about a certain place in Margate. But I've always found that a difficult one, because I have been told, just because you've got an interest, you can't be involved in everything. But some of the expertise that person may have, if I'm making sense, could help a committee. So it's my personal thoughts.
Thank you.
I would like to come back, because the parking ticket and the parking permit are still going to be put up by 10%. So that's the bit I looked at.
Well, a vote's a vote. Mr. Blundell, please.
First off, I agree with the recommendation or the proposal that is included in training in future for members. I think overall training on registers of interest and the like is what should be happening as part of the member induction programme. Anyway, particularly for new members who wouldn't be in favour with it, but it's also useful to revisit and clarify what the position is, some guidance around it. I think there is that it's not always as black and white when you're looking at your interests. That you've got to consider whether it affects your financial position, your relative's financial position, and there's some discretion as to whether a parking permit would. That's for a member to make that decision as to whether it affects their interests or not, because it's not for officers to tell members to declare an interest, it is for members to decide whether to declare an interest or not. And therefore, when you're looking at it, you have to decide whether, I would say, if you think you are, your decision making is materially affected by your own personal circumstances. That is my view on it. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional expert, I'm not the monitoring officer. Overall, I think it would be very welcome and worthwhile to get that training built into the members' induction programme post the elections.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I was just conscious of the fact that there are a lot of subjects and a lot of information to be taught around the induction programme, and some of that information can be shared by the more experienced councillors that will be returning. Some will, some won't. And I was just wondering, therefore, whether we try and get an update in April here or whether we actually leave it. The general consensus seems to be leave it until the next thing, but perhaps when we speak with Nick Hughes about the training programme, we can ask to make sure that there's a really substantial section.
There's a substantial chunk on the role of the councillor early on, isn't there? So it would fit in quite naturally with that, I would have.
Well, it is. There are some really big issues where, in my experience in the last 8 years, the council has not had a set position, and it's varied in its advice, depending sometimes on what the matter at hand is. But okay, so in April, then we have a cabinet member presentation review of the programme, and that would be April would be our last meeting before the elections. So if there are no more comments to make on our work programme, the next agenda item, and item number 10, is the plan and exempt cabinet report list. Do members have any comments they wish to make about that? Councillor Austin.
Groundhog Day again, I'm afraid, noting that Cabinet are about to make further decisions about levelling up spend on Ramsgate Port, and begging desperately for anything remotely resembling the level of detail and information that we've had from Sally this evening on the massive amount of spend intended there, where we've had lengthy correspondence with Mr Blundell about this in the lead up to the council meeting, which resulted in Councillor Wing and me feeling that we needed to abstain because we still do not have that information. We have copies of project initiation documentation where the risk assessment sections are completely blank. This is really worrying, and so I would like to recommend, if we are allowed to do that, to the future overview and scrutiny panel post-election, that at an early stage officers are invited back to give us to give future councillors more information about that, because it really is a great concern that there are these big decisions being made and yet so little detailed information on actually how the money is being spent seems to be available to councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Wing, thank you.
I'll follow on from Councillor Austin. On top of that, there is a future concern. There's a concern about possible future liabilities, as I said, that the residents of Thanet would foot the bill. If we manage to bring a ferry in, nobody's evidenced the sort of the high risk and the low risk of actually the ongoing cost to us as a council to actually service that ferry coming in. As we know, Trans-Europa, I believe, left leaving berthing fees. It was clearly uneconomic for them to operate out of Ramsgate. We'd obviously provided the berth, provided the staffing, which left us with our own liabilities. And I certainly think that as an elected person representing the ward there, but as just as a councillor, I'd like to see those risks modelled. What are the future costs? We've got the capital money to perhaps build it so they will come. But what are the ongoing costs if we actually manage to bring a ferry in? Is it sustainable in the long term? What are the risks to us as a council? But more importantly, what are the costs, possible costs likely to be for residents if they have to subsidise a ferry coming into our port? And we've not seen, first of all, we've not seen any documentation that's evidenced whether a ferry is viable in our port, and we've not seen any evidence that models future risk, and that's really worrying.
Indeed, and I can't answer those questions because we haven't even seen a document yet that says there is going to be one coming in. So I don't know, but I think the point you make is valid. There should be, as in all things, more information, but sometimes it really does depend on the structure at which the council operates. I mean, we are here to scrutinise decisions made by the cabinet system under which we operate, and we can call in, for example, we can invite Southern Water in, we can call in people who operate in the area which has an effect on our residents. But this panel isn't I don't quite know how to say this, but I'm playing devil's advocate a bit. This panel isn't a panel for second guessing and changing decisions and minds unless there's a solid reason for it. Was it Councillor Lees?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I agree completely with Councillor Austin. I think there's a greater deal that this panel can do in terms of scrutinising these decisions, even if we, sort of disagree probably with what should be done at the port. There's a greater deal that we as a panel should and could be doing, and I think we need to be given that opportunity to do so.
Any other comments from members? Yes, Councillor Austin, you want to come back?
Add that following the council meeting the other week where Councillor Wing and I abstained, we have been contacted by councillors from across the chamber and by a number of residents saying yes, they are worried about this. We have an email in our inboxes which has gone to the leader and Mr Carmichael from a resident in our ward saying, why have we had no updates on this? Why do we have no information on this? We're residents, we're paying our council tax, don't we deserve this information? I think that there is quite a lot of concern out there, and I think this panel needs to be scrutinising those decisions quite closely. Thank you.
So do you have a specific recommendation? Are you wanting us to have more information by April, or are you wanting it to be for the new council post-elections to be given a detailed but big picture analysis of that piece of real estate and what's going on or may go on? Is that what we're asking for?
I'd love us to have more information by April. I don't know how realistic that is, but I'm sure that those of us who have sat on this panel up to now would like to be able to end our period on it by having some information that would be useful, particularly those of us in whose ward the Ramsgate port sits. So I'd like to say, yes, please, can we have something for April? If for whatever reason that isn't possible, then to put it perhaps on the forward programme for our successes on this panel.
Thank you. And I think it starts with a letter to the leader of the council then, really, doesn't it? From this committee to the leader of the council. Councillor Townend.
We talk about what we're spending, what we don't know how much we're going to spend or anything like that. The point is that we talk about ferries coming into our port. Do we know where these ferries are? Do we know who operate them and how much they cost? Where are they? I mean, we talk about Belgium. We talk about Belgium having ferries that operate on the same basis that we hope to come our way. Do we know how much information do we have? I've never heard any information or been given to me any information.
Councillor Townend, I think you're right, yes, and I think that's the point that was being made. Councillor Wing, then.
I mean, you just said we've got the power to pull people in to ask for additional information. So is it possible for this committee to pull the relevant officers in? I mean, I did ask that question about how many, don't give me the name of the ferries because that's commercially sensitive, how many ferries have we got interested? And there's just a waffly answer. We need, you know, we need concrete, yeah, sorry, pardon the pun. We need, you know, I would love to see a business case. You know, it was once said to me that, you know, it's not the responsibility of this council to have a business case, followed by you're an inexperienced councillor who doesn't know what she's doing. But I'd read the Local Government Association's whole document, because I'm an inexperienced councillor who didn't know what I was doing, which was about procurement, okay, and how if you're going to spend money wisely, you must have a business case. Now, I don't know who's driving the drive for a ferry. I don't think any of us do. You know, I'll use the analogy with the airport. I'm not a supporter, but we know it's RSP. Okay, we can see, touch, feel, and read stuff. Who is driving? Who is driving the need for a ferry? Where has it come from? Has it come from Cabinet? We know it's not come from a policy, because that came out of a question that was asked here. There is no policy for a ferry. And that really, and it's not just about the port. I know we focus on the port. It's about, are we doing things right in other areas? You know, the whole thing over the cement batcher and berths 4-5 should be a whole lesson of learning and improving practice for the future. And what I fear is we're just going to have another thing that is going to saddle residents with additional costs. We need to learn, and we need to make sure we're doing what we should be doing. And you look at the housing budget, and the last little window is evidence, the need for it, why it's there, why we need to spend it. It's there in that document. That's what we need to see in every bit of spend we have. That's my opinion anyway.
I think it's a valid point. I think there's you know, me, devil's advocate again, there's a difference between what we have to provide by statute and what we may or may not provide if we've got the money, I guess. But thorough information, you can never have too much thorough information, but you've got to recognise commercial sensitivities and all those kind of things. I don't know that we would get anything on that by April. It's not very far away. But certainly for the new council post. Mr. Van Dam.
Chair, thank you. Members will note that on the forward plan there is the item for the Cabinet decision, the future delivery Port of Ramsgate, what the decision will mean, decision on the direction of the operation delivery in connection with the Levelling Up Fund supported by Port Infrastructure project. So there is the opportunity, if members so wish, to discuss that at a overview and scrutiny meeting. It could be called in time for the subsequent OSP, if members so wish. I am aware that there's a package of information that's going to be provided to members in advance of the papers going out into the public domain to fully brief members around the context of the decision that Cabinet are being asked to make. So my understanding is the members' briefing will be held first and the papers will be released subsequent to that as well. But that doesn't obviously negate the opportunity or the power for OSP to call in any Cabinet decision if they so wish.
Thank you very much.
May I come back on that? Sorry. Just to say, I think that sounds very helpful. I think the difficulty that we have as a panel, and we've had it this evening with the Southern Water matter, is that we have to prove that Cabinet's decision-making is flawed and why it's flawed and so on. And we tried that very hard with the Southern Water matter, and it was not successful. So I think there is a procedural issue there that we face, that we may be able to get more information, but hopefully if we get a members' briefing, at least we may be able to ask some more questions and maybe even get some answers this time.
Okay, members, are there any other comments, queries, questions you wish to make? In that case, it's 9 o'clock. That clock up there is a little bit fast. That concludes the business of tonight's meeting, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for your attendance and also all the very helpful comments that came through, and the live streaming will now end.